Have you ever stood beneath the night sky and felt a vague, unnameable yearning? A sense that this tangible world, with its familiar fields and rivers, is but a fraction of a grander reality, a symphony of which you can only hear the distant bass notes. Before the world was cleansed by water, this was not an uncommon feeling. It was the breath of the age, a low hum of tension in the air, as if creation itself were holding its breath for what was to come. In a village nestled on the slopes of an ancient mountain, there lived 3 women, each a universe unto herself. There was Adira, the weaver, whose nimble hands could create textiles that mirrored the dawn. But while her fingers danced on the loom, her soul wandered, searching for a meaning deeper than the threads. She sensed a greater pattern being woven into the cosmos, and she longed to read it. There was Zillah, the chieftain's daughter, a romantic soul. She did not look to the earth for answers. She looked to the stars, believing that true love was not bound by mortal dust. Her heart was an empty chalice, waiting to be filled by an affection both pure and eternal. And then there was Seraphina, a woman of sharp beauty and a burning ambition. She felt suffocated by the limits of village life. She craved not knowledge or love. She craved power, the chance to rise above, to leave her mark on the world instead of being shaped by it. And then they came. They did not arrive as invaders with swords and shouts. Their arrival was more like a shift in the very fabric of reality. One afternoon, the sunlight seemed to turn a richer gold. The air carried a strange scent, both sweet as lilies and crisp as the first snow. They walked out of the forests, not as hunters or nomads, but as if they had simply stepped through an unseen door. They were the angels, the watchers who had abandoned their posts in the heavens. Their beauty was not human. It was an aching, unnerving perfection, a harmony of light and form that stole the breath from mortal lungs. Their eyes did not merely reflect light. They held it, the light of stars, of distant galaxies, of an existence older than the mountains themselves. Each woman was drawn to a different facet of these transcendent beings. Adira found an angel whose eyes held the wisdom of the universe. When he spoke, his voice was not just sound. It was images, concepts of creation, of the laws of nature she had always longed to understand. He did not give her answers, he gave her deeper questions. Zillah, with her romantic heart, found an angel whose smile could melt winter. The love he offered her was a torrent, intense and all-consuming. In his arms, she was no longer the chieftain's daughter. She was the center of the universe, the queen of a kingdom of 2. Seraphina, with her ambition, was drawn to an angel who carried the aura of command. He did not walk, he glided. His presence made the strongest men bow their heads. He did not promise her love, he promised her greatness, a place at his side, above all others. It was an irresistible allure, a whisper from another world that promised to fill every void in their souls. They did not know they were standing on the precipice of a choice that would shake both heaven and earth. They only knew that, for the first time in their lives, they felt whole, and as they reached out, taking the hands of these luminous beings, a sacred boundary, ancient as time itself, was broken. The sky was silent, but in the eternal realms, a sorrowful sigh echoed. The fall had begun, not with a roar, but with a whisper of love and desire. The lives of Adira, Zillah, and Seraphina transformed beyond all recognition. The mundane world, with its repetitive chores and simple pleasures, seemed to recede, giving way to a new reality, shimmering and rife with mystery. This first phase of their union was a waking dream, a terrestrial paradise woven from the promises of stars. But even in the most beautiful dreams, shadows can creep in from the corners. For Adira, her paradise was knowledge. Her angelic companion, Azazel, unlocked the secrets of creation for her. He taught her to identify herbs not just for healing, but for altering moods, for soothing grief, and even for catching fleeting glimpses of the future. She learned the language of the stars, not merely for navigation, but to read the cycles of the earth and sky, predicting harvests and weather. The villagers began to seek her out, calling her the healer, the wise woman. Adira felt fulfilled, the purpose she had sought now seemingly within her grasp. Yet, sometimes, in the dead of night, as Azazel revealed deeper knowledge of how metals could be bent to one's will, how certain gems could focus energy, a cold unease would touch her heart. This was knowledge not meant for human hands. She could feel its weight, as if she were holding a sacred fire she did not know how to control. Zillah lived in a paradise of emotion. Samjaza, her angel, turned every day into a love poem. He could conjure music from the air, weave illusions of magical lands just for her. Their love was a closed-off world, perfect and untarnished. Zillah cared little for the secrets of the cosmos or the powers of the earth. She needed only Samjaza. She neglected her friends, her family, her duties, completely immersed in the adoration he lavished upon her. She believed their love was holy, a gift from a higher plane. When others in the village began to whisper, to look at her with a mixture of envy and concern, she dismissed it as the pettiness of souls who could not comprehend a love as great as hers. She did not realize her love, for all its beauty, was building walls, isolating her from the world, and blinding her to anything less than perfect. Seraphina, meanwhile, was building an empire. Her angel, Penemu, did not teach her of herbs or love. He taught her of power. He showed her how to use her beauty and charm as a weapon, how to read the deepest desires and fears in the hearts of others. Seraphina learned to speak with a confidence that compelled obedience, to command with a glance. She quickly became a figure of influence, not only in her village but in the surrounding regions. Elders sought her counsel, and warriors sought her favor. She reveled in this newfound power, this feeling of control and reverence. Penemu stood behind her like a powerful shadow, whispering strategies in her ear, helping her consolidate her position. But power came at a price. Seraphina became ruthless and suspicious. She saw everyone as a piece on her chessboard, and the warmth in her heart was slowly being replaced by the cold calculus of ambition. This change was not just internal. The presence of the fallen angels and the knowledge they imparted began to disturb the delicate balance of the world. Men learned to forge weapons not just for hunting, but for war. They learned to create dazzling adornments, which gave birth to greed and envy. The secrets of heaven, when placed in the hands of mortals, became the seeds of discord. A hidden darkness, a subtle rot, began to spread. The paradise these women inhabited was built on an unstable foundation, and the first cracks were already beginning to show, heralding an inevitable collapse. A paradise cannot last forever on cursed ground. The small fissures in the perfect mirror of their new lives began to spread, until it was impossible to deny that something was deeply wrong. The truth did not arrive like a sudden thunderbolt, but like a slow, creeping sickness, a rot that spread from the very heart of the celestial mortal union. The most visible change began in the earth itself. Fields that once yielded bountiful harvests turned strangely barren. Crops failed. Plants withered despite ample water, and strange afflictions struck the livestock. The river where children once played would sometimes turn a murky, inexplicable red. The village elders began to whisper of the sky's displeasure, of a balance that had been broken. The natural harmony was dissolving. For Adira, each of these signs was a new stab of guilt in her conscience. The knowledge Azazel had given her, once a source of pride, now felt like a crushing weight. She tried to use her herbs to heal the blighted plants, but they still died. She looked to the stars for answers, but the constellations seemed to arrange themselves into warnings, omens of destruction. She began to realize the knowledge she possessed was not creative but intrusive. They had tampered with the natural laws, and now nature was fighting back. Her suspicion grew into a gnawing fear. She would look at Azazel, and for the first time, instead of infinite wisdom, she saw a profound sadness in his eyes, the weariness of a being who had gone too far to turn back. Zillah, however, chose to ignore it all. While her village faced scarcity, she remained in her private world, shielded from hardship by Samjaza. He could conjure food from the air, water from stone. To Zillah, this was proof of his love and power, not a sign of a collapsing world. She told her critics that the problem was their own weak faith, their own jealousy. "Our love is pure," she insisted. "It is your doubt that brings this blight." She grew ever more isolated, believing only the sweet whispers of Samjaza and closing her eyes to the suffering of the world outside. Her blindness was no longer innocence. It had become a dangerous, willful ignorance. Seraphina, in contrast, saw opportunity in the chaos. As resources grew scarce, her power became more absolute. She controlled the distribution of food, using it to reward loyalty and punish dissent. She and Penemu taught her followers more advanced arts of warfare, turning them into a private army. Conflicts between villages were no longer petty squabbles. They became bloody wars over land and resources. Seraphina did not see herself as the cause of the chaos. She saw herself as the one bringing order to it. She believed the weak world needed a strong hand to rule it, and she would be that hand. She had become fully intoxicated by her power, no longer recognizing that the order she created was built on fear and violence. And then the children were born. The Nephilim. They were not normal infants. They grew at an astonishing rate, possessed of an unimaginable strength. At first, people were in awe of them, seeing them as demigods. But awe quickly turned to terror. These children carried the arrogance of their sires and the intense, unchecked emotions of their mothers. They had no concept of mercy or restraint. Adira's son, despite her best efforts, had fits of rage that could crack stone. Zillah's child, though coddled in love, looked upon weaker human children with contempt. And Seraphina's son became her ultimate tool of power, a living war machine. Their birth was the final, undeniable evidence that the boundary had been erased, and a hybrid race, belonging neither to heaven nor to earth, had been unleashed to bring about ruin. The truth was unraveled, no longer a whisper or an omen, but a terrifying giant reality standing before them. As the world spiraled deeper into a darkness of its own making, another voice arose. It was not the melodic song of an angel, nor the commanding tone of a new warlord. It was a simple, steady voice, carrying the weight of an unwelcome truth. The voice belonged to Noah, a man who lived apart on a hillside, a man who still held a fear of the Creator in a world that had forgotten him. Word of Noah and his strange project began to spread. He was building a great vessel on dry land, miles from any sea. He spoke of a coming wrath, a great flood that would cleanse the world of its corruption. He spoke of a warning from the Most High, a final chance for repentance. To most, Noah was a mad old man, a joke in a time of hardship. But to Adira, Zillah, and Seraphina, his warning was no joke. It was a judgment, a final bell tolling, and it forced each of them to face their ultimate choice. Adira sought out Noah on a moonless night. She hid her face in her cloak, but the anguish in her eyes was unmistakable. She listened to his words, and each one was a hammer blow to her breaking heart. She recognized the truth in them, a truth she had been trying to deny. She returned and confronted Azazel. "Is it true what the old man says?" she asked, her voice trembling. Azazel did not answer at first. He stared out the window, towards a sky to which he could never return. "The Creator's patience is vast, but it is not infinite," he whispered. "We taught humanity things they were not ready for. We stirred a darkness." In that moment, Adira understood. Her love, her thirst for knowledge, had been part of a great rebellion. She stood at a crossroads. Continue down the path of destruction with the one she loved, or seek a path of atonement, even if it meant solitude and pain. Zillah heard of Noah, but she refused to believe. Samjaza reassured her, telling her Noah was merely jealous of their perfect love. How could a loving creator destroy his own creation? Samjaza asked, his voice a mesmerizing balm. Our love is a gift, Zillah. It is proof that heaven and earth can be one. Zillah clung to those words like a drowning woman to a piece of driftwood. She went to see Noah, not to listen, but to mock. She stood before the massive ark, her Nephilim child by her side, and laughed in the old man's face. You waste your time, old man, she said. The world is not ending. It is just beginning. Zillah's choice was already made. She chose her fantasy, her world of romantic delusion, and she would hold on to it until the very end. Seraphina, ever the pragmatist, considered Noah's warning from a strategic angle. A flood? Was it possible? She asked Penemuel. The powerful angel acknowledged the possibility, but dismissed the threat. Even if the waters rise, he said, we will take to the highest mountains. Our power will protect us. Seraphina believed him. She had grown accustomed to winning, to overcoming every obstacle. A flood, no matter how great, was just another challenge to her power. She did not seek forgiveness. She prepared for war. She commanded her followers to stockpile resources on the high peaks, to fortify their positions. She saw the warning not as a call to repent, but as a declaration of war. She would meet the Creator's wrath with the very power she had gained from her disobedience. 3 women, 3 paths, one torn by remorse, one blinded by love, one bound by ambition. The warning had been given. The vessel of salvation was being built. The sky was still blue, but an ominous silence had settled over the land. The time for choosing was running out. And in the heavens, the tears of grief and justice were beginning to gather, ready to fall as a final cleansing rain. The end did not come with trumpets or the march of heavenly hosts. It began with an unnatural silence. The song of birds ceased, the wind died. The air grew thick and heavy, a palpable pressure that weighed on the chest. Then, from the horizon, clouds of an impossible blackness began to roll in. They did not drift. They amassed, dense and menacing, like a great curtain being drawn across the sun. From Adira's perspective, it was the materialization of her worst fears. She had left Azazel. In a tear-filled confrontation, she had told him she could not continue on this path. He did not stop her, only looked at her with the sorrow of millennia in his eyes. She had tried to warn others, but no one listened. Now, as the first drops fell, not soft, gentle drops, but heavy, cold splatters like frozen tears, she knew it was too late. She clutched her son, the Nephilim child who was now trembling, his great strength meaningless against the fury of nature. The water rose with impossible speed. Streams became raging rivers. Valleys became lakes. The screams of men and the roars of giants were all drowned out by the thunderous sound of the water. Adira ran, seeking higher ground, the water chasing her like a relentless predator. She saw familiar faces swept away, desperate hands reaching from the churning mud, and in each of them she saw a reflection of her own sin. Zillah stood on a high rock with Samjaza and their son. At first she felt no fear. She trusted Samjaza's promise to protect them. "See," he said, gesturing to the sky, "it is only rain." But the rain did not stop. The water rose, licking at the base of the rock, then at their knees. The confidence in Samjaza's face began to waver. He tried to use his power, commanding the waters to recede, but the voice that had once mesmerized Zillah was lost in the roar of the storm. For the first time, Zillah saw helplessness in her angel's eyes. He was not all-powerful, he was just a trapped rebel. The truth hit her with a brutal, sudden force. Her love was not a fortress, it was a beautiful illusion, and now it was dissolving in the cold, rising tide. When a massive wave crashed over them, tearing her child from her arms, Zillah's scream was no longer that of a woman betrayed. It was the scream of a soul utterly broken. Elsewhere, on the highest mountain peak in the region, Seraphina watched her empire crumble. The stone fortifications she had built were being eroded. Her most loyal warriors were panicking, fighting each other for a foothold on the shrinking land. Penemu stood beside her, his once arrogant face now pale. Their power, which had bent the wills of men, was useless against the power of the Creator. They could move boulders, but they could not stop the ocean rising from below and the heavens collapsing from above. Seraphina, who had never known defeat, was now tasting its bitterest form. She looked down at the drowning world, not with remorse, but with a helpless fury. She had played a game against God, and she had lost. As the water finally licked at her feet, she did not scream. She stared into the black sky with a defiant glare, as if to say that even in annihilation she would not bow. For 40 days and 40 nights the waters rose, the mountains vanished, the cities fell silent. The world became a single, endless, desolate ocean under a sky that would not stop weeping. Only one object, a vessel of gopher wood, floated upon the surface, carrying the seed of a new world and the painful memory of the one that had been cleansed. For those outside the ark, it was the end. But for a few miraculous survivors, washed ashore on the last isolated peaks, it was not the end. It was merely the beginning of another judgment. When the roar of the wrath finally subsided and the waters began to recede, a silence more profound than any tempest settled upon the world. The sun, hidden for 40 days, cast its first weak rays upon an unrecognizable landscape. Gone were the green fields, the lush forests, the bustling cities. There was only the grey-brown canvas of mud and barren rock, stretching to every horizon. A world washed clean, but also scoured of life. Adira awoke on a slippery mountainside, her body aching and her soul a hollow void. Her Nephilim son was gone, claimed by one of the countless ravenous waves. The grief of a mother merged with the weight of a sinner, creating a bottomless chasm within her. She looked out at the desolation below, a portrait of the ruin she believed she had helped to paint. There were no more tears. Her eyes were dry. There was only a bitter acceptance. She had survived, but it did not feel like a blessing. Her survival felt like a curse, an exile to bear witness to the consequences of her choice. Day after day, she wandered the dead land, scavenging for edible roots, her heart as barren as the world around her. She no longer prayed for salvation, she prayed only for oblivion. Elsewhere, on a beach littered with the debris of a drowned world, Zillah sat motionless, her vacant eyes staring out at the vast, empty ocean. She too had survived, carried to shore by a large piece of timber. But her mind had not. It was trapped in the horrific moment the wave took her child and her angelic lover. She refused to accept reality. In her mind, Samjaza was still whispering words of love, and her son's laughter still echoed in the crashing of the waves. She spoke to herself, rebuilding her fantasy world on the wet sand. She did not look for food or water. She just sat and waited. She believed that one day Samjaza would return for her from the sea, and they would rebuild their lost paradise together. Her grief was too immense to face, so she had retreated into madness, a fragile shelter from an unbearable truth. Seraphina, with her ferocious survival instinct, had found a high cave where she weathered the final days of the flood. Penemu was gone, likely pulled away by some greater force when his own power failed. Seraphina was alone, but even in the face of utter solitude and desolation, her defiance did not wane. She did not succumb to despair. Instead, she adapted. She hunted the small, resilient creatures that had survived. She found the rare pockets of fresh water. Her ambition was no longer for dominion over others, for there were no others. It had been distilled into a raw, unyielding will to exist, to prove that not even the Creator could break her. This barren world was not her prison. It was her new arena. She would conquer it, just as she had tried to conquer the old one. Her pride was her only life raft, keeping her afloat in a sea of despair. 3 women, 3 fates, cast into a new, silent, empty world. Adira sought atonement in her anguish. Zillah sought comfort in her delusion. Seraphina sought life in her defiance. They were isolated, not just by space, but by the paths they had chosen. They did not know that, though the flood was over, the judgment was not yet complete. They were survivors, but they were also living relics of a sinful age. And in the newly clean sky, another presence was watching, a presence of divine justice, preparing to descend and write the final chapter of their story. The Archangel Michael had his orders, and his sword was ready. There was no thunder or flash of light to announce his arrival. The presence of the Archangel Michael was not a clamorous event. It was a shift in reality, a silence so deep you could hear your own heartbeat. The air became unnaturally clear, and every detail of the desolate world grew painfully sharp. It was the silence of absolute authority, a weight of judgment that made the very stones fall silent. He came to Adira first. She was sitting by a muddy stream, her thin hands trying to wash a root. When Michael stood before her, Adira did not look up. She did not need to see him to know who he was. She could feel the aura of purity and justice, a light too brilliant for eyes accustomed to the darkness of guilt. Adira. Michael's voice was not a sound, but a resonance within her soul. It held no anger, only a cold and majestic gravity. You drank from the well of forbidden knowledge. You lay with a traitor. You gave birth to an abomination. What do you have to say for yourself? Adira slowly raised her head, tears finally beginning to fall again. I have no defense, she whispered, her voice a raw rasp. I was blinded by curiosity. I mistook knowledge for wisdom. Every life lost, every cry in the storm, is my sin. I do not ask for forgiveness, Lord. I only accept my punishment. Michael regarded her for a long moment. In his eyes, Adira saw no pity, but she saw recognition. He saw her genuine repentance, the complete shattering of her pride. Your remorse has been heard, he said, but sin cannot be erased by tears. He said no more, simply turning away, leaving Adira in a silence that felt even heavier than his presence. Next, Michael found Zilla on her beach of madness. She was still talking to the waves, calling Samjaza's name. Michael stood there, a brilliant figure against the blue sky. Zilla turned, squinting against the light. For a moment, she thought her lover had returned. Samjaza? She called out, a flicker of hope in her vacant eyes. Is it you? Samjaza cannot come, Michael replied, his voice cutting through her illusion like a blade. The one you call is bound in eternal darkness, awaiting the final judgment. He betrayed his creator, and he deceived you. The hard truth in Michael's words was too much for Zilla's fragile mind. She covered her ears. No, you lie. Our love was real. It was holy, she shrieked, her voice frantic. You are just jealous. Go away. Go away. Michael did not argue. He simply looked at her with a profound sorrow, the sorrow of a physician watching a patient refuse all cure. You have chosen your love over the truth, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Then you shall be bound to it. You will forever seek a shadow, listening for a whisper that will never come. Your obsession shall be your prison. The light around him seemed to fade, leaving Zilla alone with the sound of the waves and her deepening madness. Finally, Michael confronted Seraphina in her mountain cave. She did not flinch at his arrival. She stood tall, her eyes flashing with defiant fire. She had known this day would come. So, the executioner arrives, Seraphina said, her voice laced with scorn. Have you come to finish the job, messenger of the Creator? I have come to dispense justice, Michael answered, his voice as cold as ice. You, who used forbidden power to sow division and rule by fear. You, who turned the gift of life into a tool of ambition. Even now, I see no remorse in your eyes. Remorse? Seraphina scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Why should I feel remorse? For refusing a small and anonymous life, for daring to reach for greatness. Your world was full of rules. I simply wrote my own. If that is a sin, then I am proud of it. The confrontation was like the meeting of two granite cliffs. Michael, the embodiment of divine order; Seraphina, the embodiment of unbreakable rebellion. "Your pride is magnificent," Michael said, a note of something like awe in his voice for the first time. "You craved power, you craved control. Then you shall have it." He raised a hand, and a brilliant light enveloped Seraphina. "But you will never have the fealty you desire. You will have a kingdom, and you will be forever alone in it." Michael's presence was gone. The three women had been judged, not by a single sweeping act, but by personal encounters that laid bare their deepest natures. The judgment came not just from without, it was born from the choices they could not let go. And now their fates were sealed. Michael's judgment was not a final blow, but the start of a transformation, a reshaping of destiny based on the very essence each woman had revealed. The justice of heaven did not merely punish, it reflected. Each would become a living symbol of the path she had chosen. For Adira, her genuine repentance opened a different path, not of complete forgiveness, but of atonement. As Michael's light faded, she felt a change within her. The weight of her guilt was still there, but it was no longer a chasm of despair. It had become a responsibility. Michael had given her not a punishment, but a charge. She was fated to be a rememberer. She would live a long life, a life of solitude, but not one without meaning. Her task was to wander the new world, to find the other survivors, the descendants of Noah, and to tell them the story. Not the full truth of angels, which would be too much for the young world to bear, but she would tell of the dangers of pride, of the fragility of balance, of the consequences of overstepping boundaries. Her voice would carry the weight of truth, and her tales would become the first myths, the cautionary lessons woven into the cultural tapestry of the new humanity. Her fate was a perpetual penance, an unending journey where every step was a confession and every story an act of atonement. She would never be happy, but she would find purpose in her suffering. Zilla's fate was of a different nature. When Michael left, the prison of her delusion became her reality. She was not physically altered, but her spirit was locked. His judgment became manifest. She was bound to her obsession. She was to be forever the woman on the beach, waiting for a love that would never return. But there was a subtle change. Her longing, her desperate expectation, became so powerful that it began to affect the world around her. Lost sailors, weary fishermen, would sometimes see a lone figure on the sand and hear a plaintive call, a whisper of lost love. That call, born of her madness, held a strange, hypnotic allure, promising a comfort that wasn't real. Those who followed the call would lose their way, drawn into treacherous currents or onto barren rocks. Zilla had become an unwitting danger, a living siren's trap forged from blind love and the refusal of truth. She had no malice. She was simply living her tragedy, and that tragedy now had the power to draw others into its vortex. And Seraphina, defiant to the last, received a punishment befitting her pride. The light of Michael did not kill her. It transformed her. She kept her human form, her sharp beauty, but something had changed. Her skin became as cold as stone, and her eyes, while still burning with fire, held a vast emptiness. She was given a kingdom, just as Michael had promised. The desolate island where she was stranded was now hers, but it was a dead kingdom. No living thing could approach. Her very presence radiated a cold, toxic aura that withered the plants around her cave and made birds fall from the sky. She had absolute power over her domain, but it was a power of decay and isolation. She could command the rocks, and they would obey, but they could not answer her. She was a queen with no subjects, a goddess with no worshippers. She had achieved the control she craved, but the price was eternal, absolute solitude. She was cursed to live forever in the powerful prison she had built for herself, contemplating the emptiness of her victory. 3 women, 3 divergent fates. woven from the threads of their own choices and character. One became a memory, one became a warning, and one became a monument to solitude. Justice had been served, not by fire and sword, but by the immovable truth that, in the end, we become what we worship. The new world, reborn from water, was not a perfectly clean slate. Though the giants had been erased, and the cities of sin buried deep beneath the silt, echoes of the old age remained. They did not persist as physical ruins, but as invisible scars on the soul of creation, as persistent whispers in the wind and the waves. The fates of the women who were not granted a chance for atonement, like Adirathos, who had died in the flood without repentance, or those who, like Zillah, had been driven mad, not end with their deaths. Their energy, that strange fusion of human essence and angelic influence, could not simply dissipate. It became trapped between worlds, infused into the great oceans that had been both their prison and their tomb. They became the echoes, disembodied, wandering spirits. They were not the beautiful mermaids of fables. They were manifestations of loss, grief, and regret. When storms brewed, their shrieks mingled with the howling wind, a chorus of tormented souls. In the calm, sailors with sensitive ears could sometimes hear their sorrowful laments drifting up from the abyssal plains, a reminder of a forgotten tragedy. Among these echoes, one presence was stronger than the rest, a consciousness that remained intact, fueled by an undiminished pride. This was Nama. In other tales, she was a figure of unrepentant rebellion, and in this post-deluge world, that spirit transformed her into something different. She did not dissolve into the collective grief. She gathered it, focused it, and wielded it as her own power. She became the queen of the echoes, a central malevolent consciousness in the heart of the ocean. From her domain in the deep, Nama did not seek redemption. She sought company in her misery. She was jealous of the new world sprouting on the surface, jealous of Noah's descendants who were granted a fresh start, and her jealousy curdled into malice. She used her power, a blend of her old allure and new bitterness, to create dangerous illusions. She could weave phantom islands, false paradises that would appear in the mists to lure lost ships. She could create deadly currents, invisible traps to pull the unwary down into the abyss. She did not do this as part of some grand plan for dominion. She did it out of spite, out of a desire that if she could not have happiness, no one could. Zillah's call from the shore, while dangerous, was merely the echo of a broken heart. But Nama's whisper from the deep was a deliberate song. It was a song of vengeance, an invitation to ruin. She and the echoes under her command became part of the New World's spiritual ecosystem, a lurking danger, a reminder that even after the greatest cleansing, darkness can find a way to take root again in the deepest, most hidden corners. The faithful angels, the new guardians of the world, were aware of Nama and the echoes. They were the sentinels on the invisible walls, ensuring these trapped spirits did not overstep their bounds and do greater harm to the recovering world. A silent, constant battle was waged between Thema, celestial being of light might fly over the sea, its very presence calming a storm conjured by Nama's rage, or a prayer from the heavens might dissolve a phantom island. It was an endless struggle, a delicate balance maintained between a painful memory and the hope for a future. The new world may have been cleansed of sin's physical presence, but it could never be entirely free of its echo. The whispers from the deep were the eternal legacy of a wrong choice, a warning that the ocean buries not only shipwrecks, but broken hearts and unquiet souls, forever telling their tales to the waves. Centuries passed. The mud of the deluge dried and became fertile soil. Grass grew, forests returned, and rivers ran clear once more. The descendants of Noah multiplied and spread across the face of the earth, building new villages, new cities. The world had, it seemed, turned a fresh, unblemished page. But memory, however buried, never truly dies. It transforms, seeping into the consciousness of humanity in different forms. The story of the Great Flood was told and retold, from one generation to the next, but the core details began to blur. No one remembered the specific names of the fallen angels or the Nephilim. Instead, they became myths, allegorical tales told around campfires. The stories of Adira, the Rememberer, became the seeds for countless legends. Her tale of the dangers of forbidden knowledge morphed into stories of jealous gods punishing mortals for their curiosity. Her warnings about pride became fables of kings who built towers to the heavens and were struck down. Adira had fulfilled her purpose. Her name was forgotten, but her lesson, refracted through the lens of time, survived. Zilla's mournful call from the coast gave birth to legends of the spirits of women who died for love, who still wander the shores, forever seeking their lost lovers. The tales of sailors led astray by hypnotic songs may have found their genesis in her grief, a reminder of a love that becomes dangerous when it refuses to see the truth. Seraphina's lonely kingdom on her dead island became the source of stories about cursed isles, places where no brave mariner dared to land. They spoke of immortal sorceress queens who ruled over desolate wastes, envious of the world of the living. Her defiant pride became a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition, and Nama's whispers from the deep wove the innumerable myths of sea monsters, vengeful ocean goddesses, and underwater kingdoms ruled by beings who hated the sun. Every mysterious shipwreck, every unseasonable storm, was attributed to the wrath of these spirits. The story of these women who loved, who sinned, and who met their divergent fates became part of the invisible architecture of the world. It is an eternal reminder of timeless truths. That love, however beautiful, can become a prison when it is divorced from truth. That curiosity, the gift of the intellect, can become a curse when it lacks humility. And that ambition, the engine of progress, can lead to ruin when it is not tempered by compassion. The faithful angels still watch over the world. They stand on the highest peaks, they walk on the clouds, observing humanity's slow, stumbling growth. They no longer intervene directly. The lesson was too costly. They had seen how even beings of light could be seduced by darkness, and they had seen how human hearts were capable of both profound repentance and ultimate defiance. They watch with a new wisdom, one forged in sorrow and loss. And so, the story does not truly end. It has simply sunk into our collective subconscious. The next time you stand before a difficult choice, a sweet temptation, listen closely. You might hear a distant echo in your soul. The echo of Adira asking if you seek wisdom or merely interference. The echo of Zilla asking if your love is building bridges or walls. And the echo of Seraphina asking if your ambition is creating or destroying. Because the boundary between heaven and earth, between the sacred and the profane, does not exist only in ancient myth. It exists within every human heart. And every day we must choose on which side we stand, and that perhaps is the most eternal reminder of all.